Today my guest is Mark Stanislav. Mark, how you doing?
Pleasure. Good, good.
What do you do, Mark?
I'm a senior Linux administrator for MNX Solutions. We do managed services for clients across the U.S., Linux administration, security audits, reviews, architecture, cloud computing, a lot of good stuff.
You're a busy guy.
We stay awfully busy.
Yeah. You mentioned some phrase that I wasn't really aware of before. DevOps. What is that?
Yeah, so development operations are...
That's part of your job, right?
Yeah, development operations is kind of this conjoining of, well, obviously development and operations. So your coders, your programmers, and then your operations, your infrastructure people, the people who are putting the servers online, the network architecture online. And it pulls these two integrated points together across the aisle. So you normally have two separate people, you have the coder guys and the infrastructure guys, and they don't really talk, they don't really interact, mostly because their methodologies are inherently different. A good example I like to start with is the programmers, they version their code. They have code, they say, this is our testing release, this is our development release, this is our production release. Infrastructure guys traditionally haven't done that. They've had a couple boxes in a rack somewhere in a data center, and they say, okay, this looks about right. This looks about how our production environment looks, and there's not a great way to really assure that. And so what we're seeing is that there's a lot of push and pull between developers and operations, and it causes tension. It makes efficiencies that were there break apart, because you're not able to see eye to eye because you have such different ways of handling your daily business.
Interesting. So this is sort of a new thing, this DevOps thing that you're trying to get. It's not like you're trying to get the infrastructure guys to think more like developers.
Yeah,
because the developers don't seem to be thinking more like infrastructure guys. Is that?
Well, in a lot of ways, and what I like to point out in the presentation I'm giving here today at Cloud Dev Day is that the focal point of development for the last 10 years has started going towards this agile methodology set. So how do we quickly release software? How do we do it with consistency? How do we do unit testing? All these great...
How do we get quick feedback on that?
Yeah, because you don't want to have your 4-year SDLC, your life cycle, that you never get any features out. Your customers are waiting and waiting. And so for about 10 years now, agile methodologies have been showing up in more and more software houses. Now operations have been lagging behind, so maybe about the last 2 years, development operations has really started defining itself and having the community input as to what it really is. So it's kind of more of a working definition right now, but a lot of the core tenets have been rounded out. Communication, infrastructure as code, which we can talk a little bit more about if you'd like.
Well, you're talking about so Agile has a place not only in software development but also in infrastructure maintenance and releases as well.
Yeah, so getting back to development operations is just this abstract idea. I like to start with usually a picture for a presentation of a barn raising. A barn raising is a community-driven thing. Yeah. You have one goal. It's unanimous that this has to be done for the good of the entire community. Women, men, children, everyone's involved. If you look at software house, your operations people, your software people, they have the same deliverable. They might be doing, one person might be hammering, the other person might be, laying lumber, but we're getting the same goal accomplished. And whereas a barn raising has that inherent agreement that people are working together, a lot of times in technology, that agreement isn't inherent, and you have to work and facilitate a team effort to get those two sides of the coin to really work together.
Yeah, I agree with everything except for the number 2. There's also testers. There's
QA,
business owners. There's of course the infrastructure guys, the developers. I could go on and on. And there's often conflict between all those things. Partly because of what you said, people just see things differently, and partly they lose sight of the fact that there's one goal. We're all working towards the same thing.
And it's hard when you've become an expert in your realm of technology. It's very hard to go, well, I need to learn this person's realm, I need to learn that person's realm. Yeah. How as an operations guy who's laying servers into a rack, can I really affect the quality assurance team? But the reality is there's a lot you can facilitate to make their job easier and make your company more successful.
Yeah. So let's talk specifically about some of the agile things that you're doing as a DevOps guy, and to make things more agile.
So one thing we see a lot is cloud computing and the promise that you can go to the cloud and make great things happen, scaling, fault tolerance, and a lot of that is true, but you have to know how to leverage it. And what development operations and some of these methodologies get to is, how do we do that? How do we accomplish our end goal of being scalable, being agile? And inherently with development operations, one of the core tenets is, if we release code or if we release infrastructure, how do we get it online, not in a 7-year life cycle for this hardware, but tomorrow, today, 5 minutes from now? Mm-hmm. And so for our company, a lot of our architecture is cloud-centric. We're telling customers, we understand you've had these servers in Iraq for the last 5 years. We understand you want to go to the cloud to be more agile, so during major holidays or major sales day for e-commerce, you don't fall over.
Yeah, and that elasticity that the cloud
right, exactly.
vendors promise.
And the reality is, a lot of people, how they've built their infrastructure is great for their current method, but when you go to the cloud and you want to do some of those things like auto-scaling and have elasticity, it's not just a one-to-one carbon copy. You have to take things into account. And a lot of what development operations, by having the developers know that your infrastructure can scale. A lot of developers don't code for scale. They code for your finite number of servers. I have 2 servers. I know that I have to work on 2 servers, and they code, whether it's a loop, whether it's a array, they say this holds 2 things. And they haven't planned out the way to scale up. And the same thing for the infrastructure guys. A lot of us, we have 1 switch, we have 24 ports. That is the number of servers we will max have. And when they go to servers that count 200, 2,000, they aren't prepared for how do you scale infrastructure like that. And
you're right.
There's a lot of things.
I think it's more likely they're actually coding to 1 server. It's much easier to code to that. You've made the leap from 1 to 2. You're more likely to start thinking ahead of 4, 8, 16, 1,000. But that leap from 1 to 2 is a big one for most developers, at least.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for actual hardware infrastructure or operating systems. It's very easy to manage 2 or 3 servers for the day-to-day monitoring. Is the server up? Is the graph that we're looking at okay? But when you start having thousands of servers, how do you get thousands of servers online in 10 minutes? Have monitoring for all 1,000 servers? Have notifications if a server fails? How do you do that in
how do we do that, Mike?
And that's really where infrastructure as code comes in.
All right, tell me about that. Let's talk about infrastructure as code.
So infrastructure as code, it really starts lending itself to the software guys in your environment. And the way they have code is that you have classes, you have frameworks, you have structure to what you're doing. Infrastructure primarily are these like globs of servers and services and packages, and how do you really wrap your mind around that into a way that you can manage and version? Okay. And what infrastructure as code allows is it breaks everything in infrastructure down to primitives. So you have a file type, you have a package type, a service type. No matter what operating system you're on, no matter what version of Linux you're on, if one version of Linux installs a package one way and one version of Linux installs a package a different way, your infrastructure as code abstracts all that for you, and you say, I want this package installed. The rest of it's handled on the back end, and what's nice is you get a text file. You get a text file that you can version. You get a text file that when I, as an operations guy, commits a change to infrastructure, it's the same thing as if a software engineer is committing a change.
What's in that text file?
Text file might look like something really as simple as just define the type, so it might say file, have some curly braces, just like you're making a class definition in code, and say source equals foobar, and the mode of the file, so the read, write, execute privileges. Okay. You can set those, and what you can do is you can copy and paste that code just like you would any other code base.
Okay, so now you have a documentation of what you did on that day to a particular server or to a number of servers.
Yeah, so you have.
Is that also script or code that I can run? Are automated systems reading that text file and saying, okay, I want to change those file permissions automatically based on what I see in the text file?
Yeah, and what's ideal is there's a couple of routes you can go for infrastructure as code. That's a bigger idea, and then there's products that actually do this. So Puppet Labs is one company. They have a product called Puppet. There's another one called Ops Code. They have a product called Chef, and there's a few more out in the field option-wise. But essentially, when you write your infrastructure as code, it's just like writing a normal language. It's centric to that language you're writing. So if you're writing PHP or Ruby, one's not going to run the other. So when you write your infrastructure as code, you write it for Puppet or you write it for Chef.
Okay, so Puppet and Chef each have their own proprietary languages that we write to.
It's actually interesting the way that people have gone. Puppet has actually gone with a domain-specific language or a DSL. They've taken the language out of it and made it very simple for people to adapt to. Okay. Chef, the Ops Code guys with Chef have gone the other way. They actually have straight Ruby. And now the Ruby is pretty straightforward. It's not very hard to implement. but they haven't abstracted any of that away.
Okay, so you are forcing your infrastructure guys to learn Ruby.
Yeah, so you either learn the DSL with Puppet, or you learn some Ruby to be dangerous enough to deploy code. So one benefit of the infrastructure as code is if your company currently has a data center in LA, and you say, we really want to go to Amazon Web Services, we've tuned our app, we're ready to deploy it to 20 servers, not just 2. What happens is you go, okay, how do we make our LA data center the same thing into the cloud? How do we make it work for not just Amazon, but Rackspace Cloud? How do we have as many deployments across as many data centers as we want and always look the same? What infrastructure as code gets towards is this idea of a desired state. You say a server should look like X, Y, and Z. If that server ever falls out of that constraint, it'll actually self-correct. If you have a file that had read, write, execute privileges, and for some reason someone accidentally changed it to read, execute, you took away that write privilege. When Puppet runs or when Chef runs and it synchronizes, it'll say, hey, this is wrong, let's augment this for you. We'll actually generate a report showing the administrator what we did. So there's accountability at all ends. There's accountability when the operations guy commits code as infrastructure as code. And there's accountability when your management tool, Puppet or Chef, actually changes something. It sends you a report saying, hey, we noticed this was wrong, we changed it.
So now you've got some monitoring of exactly what happened as well.
Yeah, and one thing that...
which is a big problem, I know, in a lot of environments.
It really is. And one huge aspect of that is, as a developer, when you look at the end of the year and you look at what you've done, you can go to your change log. You can see your commit history and go, this is what I did. For operations, it's a lot more difficult to track because there's not an inherent audit trail. When you do infrastructure as code, you say, I built a MySQL server, I built an Apache web server this year, I deployed it to 100 servers. You have the history now. You can actually see what kind of productivity you've made, and just like a developer might go back and go, we wasted a lot of time on the second quarter because of this bug. The operations people have the same problems, but there's no good way to self-correct those situations.
Sure.
And with infrastructure as code, you have more eyes into your own problems.
I totally relate to this because I'm a developer by trade, and when part of the reasons that we're using source control and we're doing continuous integration, automated builds and deploys, the advantages are all the things that you've mentioned here. That we've got an audit trail, we've labeled releases so we can roll back those releases, or we can go back to them if we want to recreate an environment and fix a bug. If something went wrong, we have a documentation of the things that changed.
Absolutely.
And it works really well because source code is text files.
Yeah.
And now you've done the same thing. You've got text files auditing the infrastructure changes.
Yeah, the old operations, as I call it, old operations would be these scripts of just commands.
Okay.
And you would hope the commands would run. You would hope that version to version there wouldn't be errors, but there was really no way to vet that. There was no way to test that and to have that release history.
Sure.
And now there is.
Or I also like the idea you said we were going to a desired state.
Yes.
Well, just running a command might get you to the desired state if you can be assured that the state it's in already.
Yeah.
If you have 50 servers, they might not all be in the same state.
Yeah.
Right? Like a release pack, like a service pack, for example.
Oh.
Maybe all 50 of them aren't on the same service pack. You want to go up for 1.7, it might be a different CAN. Maybe you got to release 3 service packs to one of those servers and one to another.
You probably just tapped on one of the most important things for an operations person. So kind of an anecdote, we have a customer that has, I think, about a dozen web servers. Now those dozen web servers serve up millions of requests in a given week. Mm-hmm. What was happening, we were seeing errors just once in a while. It wasn't consistent. We couldn't really track down why it's coming a little bit here and there. What had happened was one server had a different configuration than all other 11 servers.
Because they were done manually, right?
Yes, they were all done manually. They were pushed out.
Change something different.
You automate a task without assurances that that task completed successfully. Mm-hmm. And so they were out of that desired state.
Right.
Now what we do for them, we use Puppet. We've created what's called a manifest, which is essentially just infrastructure as code into modules. And we run that manifest. When that manifest goes through, it would tell us, oh, your MD5 sum, your cryptographic hash does not match this file with what's installed. Mm-hmm. I'm going to replace it with what you want to be there.
Okay.
And now you don't run into that problem anymore. To a further extent, when a configuration file is changed, it can automatically reload the service for you. You don't have to push a file out and then go up to 100 servers and manually restart your web server. it'll actually take care of that for you when it sees an update. So there's a lot of day-to-day administration tasks that it's really not return on investment. You're not gaining anything. It's kind of we have to do this.
Sure. And
those are the things that slow down productivity from feature releases versus just band-aiding. And if you can have something like a Puppet or a Chef that's doing the band-aids for you, you're freed up now to actually do your job again and actually create things.
Can we integrate these releases with our development releases? So if I've written code that relies on a certain service pack being installed or a certain directory being created, and I'm using, I don't know, cruise control or something like that to do my automated deployment, can I have cruise control also called Puppet?
So what's interesting about configuration management, and because you're abstracting infrastructure to code, what I'd recommend is in a development house that you guys are really on the same page, the developers and the ops teams are really together.
Totally agree.
What you can actually do is when you have your code base for your application, you can actually include the Puppet modules into your code base. Whenever you push that code out to a server, your code base deploys and your Puppet modules deploy. And now you guys have the same repository to manage your entire infrastructure and your service level. You're not separated anymore.
So those Puppet modules are created in advance. They're checked into source control along with my source code, and then you just get labeled and pushed out.
Exactly.
It's part of the normal process.
You can tag releases. You can branch. You can clone your sources. If your developers, if they want to test what would happen if they upgraded your Apache web server or your IIS server, they can test that now.
I got you to talk about Microsoft a little bit.
Yeah, there you go. In that context, they're able to vet things and do QA testing without integrating the ops guys in the first place. So you guys can actually be more efficient because you're not stepping on each other's toes.
Right, yeah. That coordination is hard. The DBAs is also a big deal. It's hard to version control database schemas. There are tools to do it, but most people are not using them.
And database migrations is another thing, going from one version of a database to another, changing the collation type. I mean, there's all kinds of...
Yeah, I wasn't even talking about that. That's a completely different stuff. I'm just talking about if you want to add a new table or add a new column to a table, those kinds of version controls, those aren't getting done. Those are being done manually in most places. That's my experience.
And a great example of that, at a former company that was a software house I worked for, exactly what you're referencing, we would have an application that would add a new table. Our infrastructure, we would have to make our change release process to factor in. First, we have to add the table, then we can push the code. If one of us was out of sync, live code would go, a table wouldn't be there, and you have a crash.
Right.
If your schema code for operations is integrated into your release process for your software, you can never separate them, and you can never miss out.
Yeah. Does this company that your company is doing, are you like a maverick in this, or is this across the industry? Are people adopting this?
There are DevOps days, just like there are cloud days, that kind of...
In Detroit?
We don't have a DevOps day here yet. Right. It's one of those things that the West Coast is always kind of invigorating things, but
I've got some viewers on the West Coast.
They have been on, I think, DevOps day in Boston recently, a few months. So it's definitely a trend that's catching on. It was one of those things that you start using technologies and start using methodologies, and then you find out, oh, hey, someone's classified this. Yeah. So I had been doing...
Kind of legitimizes them when you give it a name.
Yeah, and it helps pull together, and anytime you have a Wikipedia definition, you're doing something right. So you have this case where I was doing things that were DevOps or DevOps adjacent, but I didn't know I was, and then you find out there's a community of people, of like-minded people, of community-driven people who want to pull these two camps together: the ops, the QA, the developers, and they want to have great products that work together. It's very easy for either side of the coin to say, well, the code scaled, the operations team didn't. The operations scaled, and what you're getting to is that if you're really looking for a solution, you have to think of the entire problem. And when you work together in such a heterogeneous way, by pushing code and infrastructure together, I think the greatest example I probably have is if you're a developer and you've ever wanted to upgrade a web server or a framework, and you had to go through your operations people to make that happen. Now we're at a point that you can actually submit a pull request to your operations team to say, I want to merge your infrastructure with my code base I forked. You've abstracted everything away and taken the walls down, and now made it 100% familiar to your developers. They know what code is. They know how to version code. They know how to manage code.
Absolutely.
And now we're to the point that both teams are finally together.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up by one last question, which is what. there's somebody watching the show that says that wants to get to where you are, but they're working by themselves. Where are they going to go to find out information on how to get started?
So the development operations community, IRC is a great place. Freenode IRC network, their development operations channels. Another great way is really to look at these tools that make up the operations side of it. So if you think of things like Puppet or Chef, if you think of things like the Marionette Collective, M Collective, it's a orchestration tool, or Rundeck. These are all tools that make up how you implement development operation methodologies.
Okay.
So any channels related to that on IRC, really, if you Google quickly, you're going to find a lot about it. Because it's such a newer topic, a lot of the content out there has evolved over the last couple of years, and you can really see the history of how things have changed, how mindsets have changed. There are companies, DTO Solutions is a company that really is a DevOps-centric company. A gentleman named Damon Edwards, he's kind of one of the, we'll call him a patriarch of development operations. John Willis, he was formerly with OpsCode, which again does Chef. He's with DTO Solutions now. These are some of the guys that go around and really kind of evangelized it for me and really brought me into the loop of what it is and what it means to be in development operations.
And are you blogging about this?
My website's uncompiled.com. I do have slide decks up there about development operations, about scaling in the cloud, and I do post articles quite often about DevOps-related situations.
All right, and you're speaking today at Cloud Dev Day?
Yeah, speaking about development operations today at Cloud Dev Day, so it should be an exciting talk.
All right, Mark, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, appreciate it, Dave. So have you seen that show, Technology and Friends?